They say that when Columbus came into the Americas, that the natives didn't know what they were. And it took them a few days before they actually got that there were ships with human beings on them, because they didn't know ships. There was no ships. Another native story I read about is natives watching a train. Trains were new. These things would puff smoke, they would eat people, and then they would poop them out. It was amazing. They were dragons. And I think about the forest people. I think it was Colin Turnbull. The forest people, many of us know them as pygmies. And you know, these folks lived in the forest their whole life, generations. They never saw things more than a few feet away because that's the way it was. And this anthropologist, again, I think it was Colin Turnbull, took them to the savannah, out to the edge of the forest, and there in the distance they saw these little hippos. And they weren't little, of course, they were just in a distance, but they'd never seen at a distance. So they started swatting around them like these hippos were some kind of insects, because they hadn't yet learned to see that yet, to see a new way. And that's what our subject is today. It's a new way of seeing, and it's happening all the time. You know, if you look at just in the last 100 years, the way we see gravity, light, space, and mass. If you look just in the last 10 years, topographic chemistry, we can now create a 3D model of enzymes and proteins. And if you look at one of the big evils that we're seeing is big data. You see, people have learned to see our data in new ways that allow us to be manipulated. And we all better learn to see that way. The big changers to me of seeing are science, travel, and language. They say if you learn another language, that bilingual people, and they've done both neurological and cognitive studies on bilinguals, they see the world different. And look at just reality. Look at matter. We used to see matter as stuff, and then we saw matter as energy, and now we're seeing matter as information. And the atom that I was brought up in, this little solar system, that's not the way an atom looks. It's a buzzing cloud, and it's a different way of seeing. You see, the world is always shifting based on how we see it, and how we see it is changing. It's an amazing thing. Look at just food. I don't know if y'all are into the History Channel, but the history of food. I mean, when cities started happening in the industrial age, people had to eat. And if it wasn't for Campbell's, we would not have healthy cans. They came up with a can that was not full of lead and had to be soldered, and that was airtight. It's amazing how we see it. And just look up. 200 years ago, the heavens meant one thing, and now, based on astronomy, it means something very, very different. Education. Education changes the world out from under us. At least it did me. And think about a shift of meaning, okay? There's a whole context today called therapeutic reframing. You know, think of and this is a true story. There was a garage and there was this old dresser in it. And this guy said his wife kept nagging him to go out there and get rid of it. And, you know, because it was full of mice. So he went out there and he started cleaning it out, and it was just a piece of crap. And then he turned it around and he realized it was signed by his great-great-grandfather who had made it. All of a sudden, that piece of trash, the value, the meaning, and the worth changed. And what did he do? He didn't throw it out. He redid it. That it became reframed and the meaning shifted. It's happening all the time. And talk about therapeutic reframing. You know, someone said you should only read what you want to read. Well, I don't want to read this new book on Robert E. Lee that I got, but I need to read it to reframe my life. Because Robert E. Lee was my hero. I was deceived. And I'm re-seeing the world. I'm finding new ways to see the world. You see, we're not done yet. The world is still being put together by the human family. And hopefully we each have a growing edge. And that's what I want you to get out of today's episode. I want you to see that you have a growing edge, man, where things are looking different. And maybe you would appear odd if you dared to share them. Screw that. Share them. There are new ways of seeing that are coming upon us, and we have ways of seeing that our parents did not. They didn't have rock and roll. They didn't have TV like we did. They didn't have the internet. There's a whole series of things that are happening that are changing the way we see things. And those new ways of seeing, the more intentional and conscious we can be of them, the greater the yield and the greater the growth. So, new ways of seeing. I want to welcome Bob Hayes and Marianne Rudis, my cohorts, and I also want to thank them for showing up every week and indulging me. As well, I would like to thank our listeners. I hope you all know how much we appreciate you, and I would love to hear from some more of you. redhawkthedeepend@gmail.com. redhawkthedeepend@gmail.com. Would love to hear from you. Just this last week, we've had listeners in Australia, in the Philippines, in England, and all over the country. And it's really nice. But it's also extra nice to hear from you all. The one that I heard of secondhand is that we are a threat to the human family, which made me feel very proud, because I don't know how we would be a threat. Anyway, new ways of seeing. Bob, what say you on this front?
Well, I'm going to go back to Colin Turnbull and echo a little bit about what you were saying about him. I was lucky enough to take a couple of courses with him, and he was a fascinating guy. He was tall. He was about 6'4", very dapper British gentleman who had left England and spent most of his life in the jungles of Africa or in the deserts. And I was at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia, and it was just a lucky coincidence that he happened to be there at the same time, and I was able to take a couple of courses from him. He was there to study the drinking habits of rural Virginians, and he would sit on his front porch out in the sticks or on somebody else's front porch and drink beer and drink homemade moonshine with them and just talk. And he was studying that culture, something he'd never been exposed to.
Wow.
But he opened my eyes to a lot of different things, as well as my courses in sensation and perception and so forth. One of the things that he found with the forest people was that they couldn't see corners. If he took them into a modern house, they would look up at a corner and they couldn't figure it out because all of their houses were built out of branches that were all curves. They'd never seen a corner in their life and they couldn't perceive it. Now, once they were exposed to it and it was explained to them, the same thing with seeing large animals at a distance. Once they understood it, they could change. And that's true for all of us. Once we get a chance to see something new, and if we don't fight against it, and we've talked about cognitive dissonance and all of the struggle that humans have with change, but once we open ourselves up, we can see new things. We have the ability to see things that we could not conceive of before that. So it was a real pleasure to have courses with Dr. Turner.
And to also address that process and make it more intentional as we shift from one way of seeing to another. Marianne?
Yeah, I think that this is a fascinating topic, and it has many prongs. But what's interesting to me is Turnbull's story. Okay, he immersed himself in a different way of seeing and being, and he did that by exposing himself to new and different things. And I think that's our challenge. How do we expose ourselves to new and different ways of seeing Because once you see something, and you both have talked about this, you don't go back. You can't go back. You can't unsee what you have seen. You can maybe try to bury it and fight against it, but you can't unsee it. So I think the whole idea of focused attention on something new. So if we decide that we're going to go out and say, I am not going to look at today the same way I did yesterday. I am going to focus on trying to find something new and different. That is going to shift our way of seeing the world. And I think when we do that and we allow ourselves to even just temporarily see things differently, we're going to shift in ourselves and we're going to grow and we're going to find new meaning.
Yeah.
So,
and to ride that train, if you will, to allow that to happen. I recall when Josh got accepted to American University, so we just flew out there, and I remember looking out the window of our hotel room, and Josh was sitting there crying. And I said, what's going on? He said, I'm scared. I got no place to live. I got no furniture, And I said, look out the window. Now look at what you're seeing, okay? And hold it in your mind, because tonight I want you to look out that window again. That day, we got him a place. We got his books. We got him registered. He got him registered. We got him furniture. And he looked out the window that night, and he said, wow. It looks so different. And that shifting horizon of meaning, and this is what phenomenology really talks about, is how that meaning horizon shifts and how we do allow ourselves to see things anew. And I think this is when Jesus put the little child on his lap and said, unless you see like this kid sees, you can't get into heaven. In other words, we are in the middle of a huge shape shift ourselves. And I guess part of this podcast, what I want to really say to our listeners is stay open to new ways of seeing. When you're offered something new, don't just toss it. Try it out, put it on, look in the mirror, see how you look in it, whatever. I think that this is part of the changing aspect of human beings, that we are now becoming process people. We're moving from content to context, and we've talked about that in our shows on paradigm shift and things like that. There is a shifting happening from things to processes, because we know that things themselves are just little bits of processes happening in time frames that are so minuscule that it's hard for us to conceive of, but we can now conceive of them. We can hold them in our mind. We can see those in new ways. And I think that process is everything. It's where we find our growing edge.
It's interesting to see how a new way of seeing takes off and spreads through culture, through our society, because it starts off where just one or two people can see things. You talked about the new ways of seeing the atom. In the turn of the 20th century, it was just people like Niels Bohr, people like Albert Einstein, people who were studying the mathematics of the universe. And they were beginning to see this. But now, kids in elementary school are seeing these new models. And it's nothing unusual for them to think of an atom in terms of probabilities of where an electron is going to be at any given moment in time, and those kind of things. I think about the Marvel movies.
I was just going there. I was writing down a note on that front.
The big thing coming out now in the Marvel universe, if you will, is this whole idea of a multiverse, of these different characters from different comic books are crossing over to different universes and encountering each other.
And not only that, it showed up on Saturday Night Live's opening skit, where it was an assumption that everybody knew about the multiverse.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing that I'm getting at is it spreads through culture. And it started out as a very esoteric theory of physics that because we couldn't guarantee the position or the speed of an electron, there was a theory that these electrons existed in multiple universes. Everything that we thought could possibly happen actually happens. And now that theory is being promulgated through culture, through these call them kiddie comic books, and when we were kids, that's the way our parents looked at them. But now I don't even know how to imagine what it's going to be like for our children's children having been immersed in this idea of a multiverse for all of these years.
Well,
and go ahead, Marianne.
Well, I was going to say, just that it's being mainstreamed, right? You're getting it into the popular culture, something that was being talked about in scientific communities. But even something as within my lifetime, where I've seen and language, I think, is a big part of this. Our language change, where people start talking about our inner world. My grandparents would have been, "What the heck are you talking about? An inner world?" And now it's just so it permeates all of our conversations. But as you were both talking, what really popped into my head was the need for discernment in all of this, because we are out there taking in all of this new information. And what do we do with it once we take it in? We allow it to change ourselves. We allow ourselves to grow, but we also have to be discerning. And we have to be able to say that, yes, there may be multiverses out there, but what do I do with that?
And Marianne, what we're doing is we're trying stuff on. Think about the nuclear age. Look at all the movies we got of giant spiders, of giant women, of monsters, of every kind of sort that came out of how do we process this nuclear thing. And I mean, Spider-Man, would he get bit by an atomic spider? So even that's a piece of that. We're processing.
Right.
It's not something you look at and you get and say, oh, this is the proper one. It's something you have to look at, and this is what algorithms are. This is why I think evolution is an algorithm. We try everything out, every iteration we can get our hands on, and then we see, and this is part of the problem of our time, and then we see which is most healthy and reflects wholeness. The problem is we can't go through all these things anymore, because some of them will be the end of us. So we have to pre-experience them. And this is where even, why we have the COVID vaccine so fast has to do with chemical topography. We can now map what bacteria and viruses are doing. We can see how they take 15 feet of code and squeeze it into a microscopic space. And we see how that ribbon of information turns on itself, not unlike the way the brain is turns on itself and has all these little pieces. So we're learning to see in a different way, and we're learning to see how we see. And that is a big difference, because the way we see, what did Einstein say? Everything's changed but the way we think. And we're trying to catch up to our thinking to what is real.
Well, and I think that whole process that you just described, it's happening to us singularly and collectively. And so and so that's kind of what with that whole discernment piece, where our singular processing of this is going to carry us out collectively.
Amen. And I want to say, I've used the word education a few times. I'm not talking about formal education. I'm talking about staying informed, reading, watching History Channel, and really trying to tune in to not the ancient aliens part of the History Channel, but the historical part. I'm sorry. I'm biased on that front.
You guys like fantasy. You like sci-fi. I kind of like the alien stuff.
I love it. I love it. And let's look at the word alien. How we see that, and how we see that. And I mean, I know people who are saying, I hope there is some aliens and they intercede, like some God that's going to intervene or something. We're scrambling for ways of seeing that can put the insanity of what we're experiencing into a context that can be addressed in a healthy way. And I think that's been a human problem since the very beginning. There are so many new ways of seeing, and there are so many forces against those ways of seeing that it's very difficult sometimes to allow yourself a new vision of the world. And I'll be honest, my way of the world is changing. I'm reading this book on reincarnation, and you've heard me talk about that. But I guess I just feel at home with the mystery, and I kind of go, oh, backstroke. This is a trip. Watch how far that one shoots to infinity and back.
Well, it's part of the human experience to have these new ways of seeing. As much as we fight against it, it's part of us. I mean, if you think back to probably the top new way of seeing in all of history was the Buddha, who suddenly went from being a sheltered prince to seeing the suffering in the world and change. And that change of viewpoint led him to start what has become one of the major religions on the planet, where one person changed his way of seeing things, changed millions and millions over the course of history. And as we look at the struggle between people who are supporters of science and people who are science deniers, there's that idea of the scientific method as trying out these different things and testing them and making a determination, making a discernment of which is the better, which is the more truthful way of seeing. And that whole scientific method started with a few people and has spread through most people at least have an idea of what science is up to. They may deny it. They may not understand what an experiment is, or they may not understand how it works. But at least they're not totally cut off from it. And as I've said in many of these episodes, it's all a numbers game. The more people see the truth in the way the scientific method works, the more it's going to spread.
Yeah.
Well, and like you were saying, how one person sees it, right? And one person gets it, and then they can show it to another, and that person sees it. And that's where that whole connection piece comes in. And then they see it, and then another person sees it, and another person sees it. And if you get to, because, I mean, I see things that nobody else is ever going to see, right? I mean, the way I put things together, the way I see something is going to be a very unique expression of the way I see them. Now, especially when it comes to aliens, but we're not going to go there. but I'm not going to try and convince anyone of that. But what I do want to do is say what I see when I look out at human beings. I see that we don't always have to be at war. I see that we don't always have to be trying to one-up each other. I see these things. And so how does one person who sees something do what the Buddha did? How do you, and I think that's where we start to see a glimmer of truth, because the things that catch on touch each one of us inside as truth. And those are the things, so even with your scientific method, when you have a scientist who discovers something, that whole peer review process, they have to take that out and have other people see what they saw in order for that to be able to take off and kind of, and I think everything works that way.
Yes.
Not just in science.
And
right?
and that, now we're back to storytelling. You know, one
Right.
person doesn't tell another, or they only do that until a storyteller gets hold of it, and then that person tells tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, who knows how many. As you were talking, what kept coming to mind was entertain the thought. When it's something new and crazy, dare to entertain the thought, because you know what? Those thoughts can be very entertaining, and they're making it into the Marvel universe, the DC universe. They're making their way into Westworld and every other show that I'm seeing. There are different ways of seeing the human being, putting us not just about content again, but about context. A whole new way. We're moving from these simple relationships into systems of relationships. We can no longer consider, and this is a new way of seeing, we can no longer consider a single individual outside the systems. They're all interdependent. This is a new way of seeing. It's a new way that our generation has brought to fruit, and it's a new way of seeing that is getting extreme amount of pushback, and it's causing conflict because it seems to, in some people's way of thinking, demean the individual, when to me it lifts the individual up in new and exciting ways. Now, having said all that, I will say we're coming to the end of our time, the fastest half hour of the week for us. So final comments, Marianne?
I think I would just like to reiterate kind of what you just said and close with that. Don't be afraid to entertain new thoughts because they can take you into new worlds. So,
amen. Bob?
And seeing things in a new way isn't just the big ultimate questions. Those are the things we love to grapple with, but it can be very mundane things. I'll give a quick example. These shows where the expert comes in and helps a restaurant owner redesign the way the restaurant works because they're not able to make a profit and so forth. And one of the first things they do is get all of the people together and teach them a new way to see what that restaurant is and how that restaurant should operate. And until they can all see that and share that vision, then the restaurant's not going to succeed. So in something as simple and everyday as running a small business, it's still learning new ways, better ways of seeing.
Amen. Amen. And the whole concept, new ways of seeing, well, I have to say, I'm on the front edge of a lot of new ways of seeing. But one of them is, what's the point of my life? No, what's the point of life? I mean, my life. Let's say I've had 30 lives. What's the point? What am I here to learn? I want to get personal next week, and I want us to each talk about what it is we are here to learn. Personally, me, what's the point of my life? And I ask you to think about that. What's the point of your life? What are you here to learn? Look at the thread of your life. And watching that thread, what does it seem, what are the lessons that you seem to be bringing into your little covey of self? What's the point of my life? What's the point of Bob's life? I'm interested. I have my own view of Bob and Marianne. I'm interested to see their views. I used to do a graffiti when I was young, and it would be, see others as they see themselves. See yourself as others see you. Drop acid. Look within. I don't think you need to drop acid to look within, but I do think we all want to see who we are. My friends, blessings, and in all things, may the one be with you.